In a world where every emotion is digitized, we search for the rare, flickering pulse of a genuine human heart. Explore the deep connection between man and machine in our latest high-contrast cinematic series. Click subscribe now and witness the beautiful collision of humanity and technology today.
The call from Seoul came at 30:19 in the morning, and the trap I'd spent 6 months quietly building was finally ready to spring. I'm 61 years old. My name doesn't matter much in this story. What matters is that I spent 34 years at Halbrook Aerospace Systems, and for 31 of those years, I ran the propulsion engineering division out of our facility in Wichita, Kansas. I started as a junior thermodynamics engineer in 1991, right out of Purdue, with a slide rule my father gave me and a head full of equations I still dream about. I built my career the way my grandfather built his house, nail by nail, beam by beam, careful, patient, no shortcuts. I caught the small things. That's what my team always said about me. While everyone else was chasing quarterly bonuses and promotional photos, I was the one reading the fine print on supplier contracts at 2 in the morning. I was the one who noticed when a subcontractor in Alabama had shipped a batch of turbine blades with the wrong alloy ratio back in 2008. That catch saved us a recall that would have cost the company $90 million and probably gotten 3 pilots killed. Nobody threw me a parade for it. I didn't want one. I just wanted to keep doing the work. I had a framed photograph on my office wall. It was taken in 1994, a shot of me standing next to Gene Kranz at a symposium in Houston. Gene shook my hand that day and told me that real engineers don't make noise. They make things that fly. I kept that picture on my wall for 29 years. It wasn't decoration. It was a reminder. My wife Eleanor passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 18 months from diagnosis to goodbye. After she died, my office became something more than a job. It became the place where I could still feel useful. My daughter Maggie lives in Denver with her family, and she calls me every Sunday. Otherwise, the office was my life. I'd be there at 6 in the morning, usually before the janitors finished their rounds. I'd make a pot of coffee in the break room and sit with my thermodynamic simulations until the rest of the building woke up. Then the CEO's son came back from his MBA program. His name was Chadwick. I'll call him the nephew of the chairman because that's who he really was. The sister's son of our founder and chairman, Harrison Halbrook. Chadwick had spent 3 years at a private equity firm in New York and 2 years at Wharton, and he came back to Wichita in February of last year with a job title that didn't exist before he arrived. Chief Transformation Officer. He was 31 years old. He had never designed a component in his life. He had never set foot on a factory floor longer than it took to shoot a LinkedIn video. The first time I met him, he walked into the weekly engineering review in a slim-cut gray suit with no tie, and he took the seat at the head of the table. The seat where our chief engineer, a man named Walter Bellamy, who had been with the company since 1987, always sat. Walter came in a minute later, saw Chadwick in his chair, and just stood there holding his coffee. Chadwick didn't even look up. He said, "Walt, grab a seat anywhere. We're going to be shaking things up around here." Walter retired 6 weeks later. I watched the man who had taught me how to read a combustion chamber diagram walk out of that building with his cardboard box, and nobody from the leadership team came down to shake his hand. Nobody except me. The new org chart came out in April. Chadwick had restructured the entire engineering division. He'd collapsed 3 legacy teams into something he called the Accelerated Innovation Cluster. He brought in 4 consultants from McKinsey and 2 product managers from a failed drone startup in Austin. My title changed from Director of Propulsion Engineering to Senior Technical Advisor. My salary stayed the same, but my direct reports went from 47 engineers to 0. I was now, in Chadwick's words, a thought leader. I didn't say anything. I didn't storm into his office. I didn't send a complaint to HR. I just kept coming in at 6 in the morning. I kept reading the supplier reports. I kept running my simulations. Because I knew something Chadwick didn't know. I knew that Halbrook Aerospace was in the final stages of negotiating a $7.2 billion defense contract with the South Korean government. I knew it because I had been leading the technical compliance team on that deal for 19 months. I had flown to Seoul 4 times. I had spent 112 hours in a secure conference room in Daejeon with their engineers, walking them line by line through our turbofan specifications. I knew every person on their technical review board by their first name. I knew that their lead engineer, a man named Dr. Mir, Park Jin-ho, had a daughter studying aerospace engineering at MIT, and I had written her a recommendation letter the previous summer. Chadwick didn't know any of that, because Chadwick had never asked. On the morning of June 12th, I came in at 6 like I always did. I walked down the hall toward my office on the 4th floor of the engineering building, and I saw something I hadn't expected. The door to my office was open. The lights were on, and there was a new nameplate on the door. It said in sleek silver letters on a black background, DSRU-TO-SO-TO. Below it, in smaller type, Kendra Haybrook, Innovation Catalyst. Kendra, the chairman's granddaughter. Chadwick's sister's daughter. 24 years old. Fresh out of a design thinking bootcamp in Palo Alto. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, holding my coffee. Then I walked into my office. She was already there, at 6 in the morning. She had a Bluetooth speaker playing some kind of ambient music, and she was unpacking a cardboard box onto the credenza. My credenza. The one my daughter Maggie bought for me when I got promoted to director in 1998. Kendra looked up when I came in. She smiled at me with her very white teeth. "Oh, hi," she said. "You must be the gentleman from the old team. I'm Kendra. This is going to be the new Disruption studio. Uncle Chad said you might still have some personal items to collect. I had facilities move everything to the storage room on 2. Sorry, I didn't know what was important and what wasn't." I looked around my office. The bookshelves were empty. The walls were bare. The photograph of Gene Kranz was gone. My engineering journals, 31 years of handwritten notebooks, were gone. The cherrywood desk my wife had given me for our 20th anniversary was gone, replaced by a white standing desk and a pink neon sign that said "Pivot Poor Parish." "Thank you, Kendra," I said. "I'll go find my things." I walked down to the second floor storage room. It was a room the size of a closet, used mostly for old office supplies and broken chairs. My things were piled in 5 cardboard boxes on the concrete floor. My journals, my books, the photograph of my wife that I kept on my desk. And then I saw the box. It was a wooden box, about 12 inches long, cherrywood, with brass hinges. Inside it were 3 medals. My father's medals. He had served in Korea in 1952. He was a combat engineer with the 1st Marine Division at the Chosin Reservoir. He came home with frostbite in both hands and a Silver Star for pulling 2 men out of a collapsed bunker under artillery fire. He gave me those medals on his deathbed in 2011. He told me to keep them somewhere I could see them every day. The box had been tipped over. The medals were loose, scattered at the bottom of the cardboard box along with paper clips and a broken stapler. Someone had tossed it all in there like it was junk. The Silver Star was lying face down on a crumpled McDonald's receipt. I stood there for a long time. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I picked up the medals one by one. I cleaned each one with the cuff of my shirt. I put them back in the cherrywood box. I closed the lid. I set the box on top of one of the other boxes, and I carried it up to my car. Then I came back inside, walked up to the 4th floor, and went to the small interior cubicle that Chadwick had assigned to me after the reorg. I sat down. I opened my laptop, and I started working. Here is what nobody in that building understood about the Korean deal. The contract wasn't just a commercial transaction. It was bound up in 3 layers of international defense framework. There was the commercial layer, which was between Halbrook and the Korean Ministry of National Defense. There was the intergovernmental layer, which required State Department certification because we were exporting propulsion technology classified under ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. And there was a 3rd layer that most people at Halbrook didn't even know existed. It was a bilateral technical trust agreement, negotiated quietly between the U.S. Air Force and the Republic of Korea Air Force, that required personal continuity of key technical personnel on both sides for the duration of the design validation phase. 24 months minimum. That clause had my name on it, specifically by name, because Dr. Park had requested it. He had told the Korean Defense Ministry that he would only sign off on the design validation if I remained the lead technical counterpart for the entire phase. That was standard practice in large defense deals between allied nations. Trust was built person to person, not company to company. Nobody at Halbrook had told Chadwick about that clause. Why would they? Chadwick didn't read contracts. He read executive summaries written by McKinsey Associates, and the executive summary of the Korean deal had described it in 3 bullet points. I spent the next 5 months gathering information. quietly, patiently. I didn't do anything illegal. I didn't take any documents I wasn't already authorized to access. I just paid attention. I noticed when Chadwick started rerouting compliance reviews to his own office. I noticed when Kendra's Disruption Studio began interfacing with our Korean counterparts using what she called a refreshed communication protocol, which mostly consisted of Instagram-style slide decks and emails that started with the phrase, "Hey team." I noticed when Dr. Freen Park stopped responding to Kendra's messages. I noticed when Chadwick quietly transferred 3 senior compliance engineers out of the Korean project and replaced them with his consultants. I noticed when the Korean Technical Review Board requested a formal clarification on U.S. personnel continuity and received in response a PowerPoint deck about agile cultural transformation. And I noticed when Dr. Park, who had not spoken to me in 4 months because Chadwick had locked me out of all Korean-facing communications, sent me a single email to my personal address on December 3rd. It said in English, "Old friend, something is wrong. Please call when you can." I called him that night. We spoke for 2 hours. On December 10th, I walked into the office of our general counsel, a woman named Margaret Ashworth who had been at Halbrook for 26 years. I had known Margaret since she joined the company as a junior attorney in 1999. I trusted her more than anyone else in the executive suite. I closed her door. I sat down. I laid out what I had found. I told her about the bilateral continuity clause. I told her about the personnel continuity requirement. I told her that Chadwick had, over the last 5 months, systematically violated that clause by removing certified compliance personnel from the Korean project and replacing them with non-cleared consultants. I told her that Dr. Chad Park and the Korean Technical Review Board were, based on my conversations with Dr. Park, within 2 weeks of formally notifying the U.S. State Department that Halbrook was in material breach of the trust agreement. And I told her what that would mean. It would mean more than the loss of the Korean contract. It would mean a State Department review of Halbrook's ITAR compliance record. It would mean a formal complaint filed with the Defense Contract Management Agency. It would mean a suspension of Halbrook's classified contract eligibility for no less than 18 months while the review was conducted. And during that 18 months, every active defense contract we had, worth a combined $16.4 billion, would be placed in automatic review. Margaret listened to me without saying a word. When I finished, she asked me 2 questions. How certain are you? Certain are to put my name on a sworn affidavit. And why are you coming to me instead of to Harrison? I looked at her for a long moment. Because Harrison's grandson is the one who did this, and I wanted to give Harrison the chance to learn about it from his attorney, not from the State Department. Margaret nodded slowly. She took a yellow legal pad out of her drawer. I'll need everything you have. Dates, emails, the original continuity clause language. I'll need Dr. Park's contact information. And I'll need you to write up a timeline. She paused. You understand what you're doing? Yes. They won't thank you for this. I didn't do it to be thanked. I spent the next 2 weeks writing up the timeline. Margaret quietly pulled the original contract documents and verified every claim I made. On December 29th, she walked into Harrison Halbrook's office on the 5th floor with a black 3-ring binder and closed the door. She was in there for 6 hours. Then the call from Seoul came at 30:19 in the morning on January 4th. I was awake. I don't sleep much anymore since Eleanor died. I picked up the phone on the 2nd ring. It was Dr. Park. He told me, in his quiet, careful English, that the Korean Ministry of National Defense would be issuing a formal notice of concern at 9 a.m. Seoul time unless Halbrook's senior leadership could provide personal assurance by name that the personnel continuity requirements of the bilateral agreement would be restored and honored through the full design validation phase. He told me he hoped I was that assurance. He told me that if I was not, he was deeply sorry, but the deal would die. I thanked him. I hung up. I got dressed. I drove to the office. At 6 a.m., Harrison Halbrook walked into my small interior cubicle. I had not seen him in person in 11 months. He was 78 years old. He was wearing the same brown wool overcoat he had been wearing for 20 years. His eyes were red. He sat down on the edge of my desk. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "I owe you an apology. And I owe your father one too." He had seen the box of medals. Margaret had shown him everything. He told me that at 7:30 a.m. there would be an emergency meeting in the main boardroom. He asked me to attend. I told him I would. At 7:15, I walked into the boardroom. The entire executive team was there. The full board of directors had been pulled in on video. Chadwick was sitting at the head of the table, in a different slim-cut suit, looking annoyed. Kendra was next to him, scrolling on her phone. They didn't know why the meeting had been called. Nobody had told them. Margaret Ashworth walked in with the black binder. She placed it on the table in front of Harrison. Harrison did not open it. He looked around the room, then he looked at his grandson, and then he looked at me. He said, "Please explain to the board what you found." I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I spoke for 22 minutes. I walked them through the bilateral continuity clause. I showed them the emails. I showed them the timeline. I explained in plain English that at 9 p.m. that evening, Wichita time, the Republic of Korea would formally notify the U.S. State Department that Halbrook Aerospace was in material breach of a bilateral defense trust agreement unless senior leadership could guarantee the restoration of personnel continuity. I explained what that notification would do to our defense contract portfolio. I explained what it would do to the stock price. I explained what it would do to the 11,000 people we employed across 3 states. When I was done, I sat down. The room was silent for a full minute. Chadwick tried to speak. He said something about narratives and context and how this was really a transformation story that had been misunderstood. He started to slide his laptop around to show a slide deck. Harrison held up one hand. Chadwick stopped talking. Margaret opened the binder. She slid 3 documents across the table to Harrison. Harrison read them in silence. Then he looked up at Chadwick. He said, "Leave the building. Do not come back. Your security access is already revoked. Your severance terms will be communicated to counsel." Chadwick's face went white. Kendra looked up from her phone. Harrison turned to Kendra. He said, "You too, sweetheart. Go home." Kendra started to cry. She said something about how this wasn't fair, about how Uncle Chad had told her it was her office now, about how she was just doing what she was told. Harrison nodded. He said very quietly, "I know. I'm sorry. That's on me, not on you. But you have to go." They left. Security walked them both out. Harrison turned to the board. He said, "I am recommending that we refer this matter to the Audit Committee for a full independent review. I am also recommending that we retain outside counsel to assess whether any actions taken over the past 5 months constitute a violation of federal contract law or of our own fiduciary duties to shareholders." The board voted unanimously in favor within 12 minutes. By noon, the 3 McKinsey consultants and the 2 former drone startup product managers had been escorted from the building. By 2 p.m., Margaret had sent a formal letter to the Korean Ministry of National Defense, signed personally by Harrison, guaranteeing the restoration of full personnel continuity under my direct leadership, with contractual penalties attached. By 4 p.m., contractual penalties attached. Park had responded with a single sentence, "Then we proceed." By 5 p.m., my engineering journals, my books, my photographs, and my cherrywood desk had been returned to the 4th floor office. The Pivot Parish sign was in the dumpster behind the building. The silver nameplate on the door had been replaced with a plain brass one that said my name, and below it, Director of Paropolis, Sean Tenerjian. I didn't cry until I got home that night. The federal investigation took 11 months. Chadwick was indicted in September on 3 counts of wire fraud related to the falsification of compliance documents submitted to a federal defense contract. 2 of his former consultants were indicted alongside him. In February, he accepted a plea deal, 34 months in federal prison, a permanent ban from holding any officer position at a publicly traded defense contractor, and restitution of $1.1 million to the company. Kendra was not indicted. The investigators concluded, correctly, that she had been used by her uncle. She left Halbrook. Last I heard, she was working at her mother's interior design firm in Scottsdale. I hope she's doing better. She was 24 years old. She didn't deserve to be destroyed. She just needed to be sent home. Harrison stepped down as chairman in June. He told the board that he had failed in his duty of oversight and that he could not in good conscience continue to serve. The board tried to talk him out of it. He declined. He now spends his time at his ranch in Montana, raising horses. He sends me a Christmas card every year. The Korean deal closed in April. $7.4 billion. It was one of the largest export defense contracts in American history. I flew to Seoul for the signing ceremony. Dr. Park picked me up at the airport personally. He hugged me at the gate. His daughter, the one I wrote the recommendation letter for, is now in her second year at MIT. She's going to be a hell of an engineer someday. I retired last month, 61 years old. I could have stayed another 5 years. The new chairman asked me to. I told him no. I told him I'd been lucky enough to do good work, and I didn't want to stay past the point where the work needed me more than I needed it. That is the thing I think that people like Chadwick never understood. The work is never about you. If you think it is, you're doing it wrong. I sent this story to my daughter Maggie last week. I told her I wanted her to read it, and I wanted her to tell her son, my grandson Thomas, who is 12 years old and who wants to be an engineer someday, that this is what the work looks like. It is not glamorous. It is not loud. It is not the kind of story that becomes a movie. It is a man showing up at 6 in the morning for 34 years and reading the fine print. It is noticing when a box of your father's medals has been tossed in with broken staplers and McDonald's receipts and deciding that the answer is not anger but patience. It is knowing that there is always a clause somewhere, written in small letters, that the loudest people in the room have not bothered to read. My father told me something the last time I saw him before he died. He told me that the men who had come home from Chosen with him were not the ones who had shouted the loudest on the hill. They were the ones who had kept their rifles clean, who had helped the wounded, who had not panicked when the shells came in. He told me that when the work is hard, you find out who the real engineers are. He said he had been proud of me every day of my life for becoming one of them. I still keep his medals on my desk at home. I polish them on the first Sunday of every month. The silver star catches the morning light through the kitchen window. And some mornings, when I'm having my coffee, I swear I can feel him in the room with me. Experience is not something you put on a resume. It is something that sits quietly inside you for 30 years, waiting for the moment when the building you have spent your life protecting is about to burn down. And when that moment comes, it does not shout. It does not demand recognition. It simply picks up the phone at 3:19 in the morning and it does what needs to be done. That is the work. That has always been the work. And that is the story of how the chairman's grandson took my office and how I, without ever raising my voice, brought his entire tower down around him in a single morning.